that. I'm not even going to present opening charts, so there. I'd like to begin, if I may, with asking each of the folks who's been invited up here today to give their name, something else, their affiliation, and any appropriate disclaimers. Not begin, their presence on this. So let me start at the far end. Pete, go ahead.
I'm Pete Barler. I'm the technical sales consultant for IBM. If you want to here it is, sales technical consultant. I was the LAN server 301 world brand manager, which is basically the person that interfaces between the customers' requirements and OS. And now working specifically on workspace on demand, work server 3 business, and have a session over here that starts out of those products. And I will try and give you the answers to my questions. And Bob, I just want to find out, you can hear me without me. It looks so okay before.
Does it look like you're calling them backwards?
My contact with those two started with the technical coordinator program when I was back at IBM, PC DOS and PC support. And I went into the IBM software marketing group. Eventually wound up working on the OS2 brand team. I left IBM last year to start Serenity Systems with Kim and Sean. The idea was to develop an integrated way to deliver business solutions using OS2 as an embedded platform. In other words, don't sell OS2 because it's too hard. Sell the ability to deliver a business solution, which, by the way, happens to be running on a proprietary Intel operating system embedded in some device, which we call PC, and combined with OS2. But you don't want to say that. That's why workspace on demand happens. My job is to develop business relationships with consultants and vendors. That's where we are.
My name is David Moskowitz. I'm moving forward. Spent a lot of time working with IBM over the years on a variety of projects, including some work with OS2 starting in 1987. Had a hand in a series of books called OS2 Unleashed, and various forms. Also responsible for the book Converting Applications to OS2 and WarpStock for IBM office. But as much as I've done a whole lot of work with OS2, I tend to be a platform agnostic. The real issue isn't so much the operating system, but getting a job done. And that's always been true for me. In our office, we've got Mac, NT, Windows 98, and I realize I'm thinking about it that there's one machine that I have to program up Windows to work with, so no client is still running Windows to work with, because the other versions are still in testing for quality assurance. But we do a lot of work these days with Java, e-business, and e-commerce. I work for a company called Productivity Solutions, which is a consulting firm located in Dallas.
My name is Oliver Mark. I'm with IBM in Germany. So I'm representing the European market in the EU. Basically, my job is as a technical consultant for all the O2 related projects we do within IBM and customers over there in Europe. I've been president of Team O2 Germany for a couple of years. I also published a few O2-related books in the past. I'm answering at least last question, which I want to say that over my daily session. We do have a German book service that we did just published 4 weeks ago. If anybody can find a US publisher, we are happy to translate that book at here.
In fact, one of the things that Oliver and I were talking about briefly yesterday, he's got his authors are significantly more fluent in English than I am in German, and if they're willing to do an English version that is obviously going to be easier for me to read, I will are getting this exposed to something that's not.
That's Texas.
What? Well, North Texas or and then there's Georgia, and you already know what happens with crackers.
Yeah.
It's also going to be a trademark here too. It's saltine.
Okay, we have an open mic on the floor, and I'm going to feel free to ask these guys the questions I came here with, unless in the bill, I see some folks with that mic, and I am more than happy to take questions from the floor at any time, especially something that we said here, for both times. But I want to begin with a question for these guys that I think probably speaks to a question many of us get asked, or maybe even ask ourselves all the time. I want you to think back to about 2 years ago. If you remember how many Unix trade publications there were at the time, how many Unix magazines there were, all of which seemed to me, simultaneously, to decide that they need to reinvent themselves from being magazines about using Unix in the enterprise environment to being magazines about making the transition from Unix to NT in the enterprise environment. So it was sort of this sudden contagion of this idea that all of them were destined to disappear. It's like that Far Side cartoon about the brontosaurus talking together and saying, "Gentlemen, I have bad news. The ice age is coming when we all have brains the size of walnuts." With the Unix people were going through that kind of prophecy of their own doom. And I think in the last 6 months or so, they've all kind of gotten up, looked around and said, "Holy smoke, we're still alive. In fact, we're doing great. We're making more money than ever. The product that we were sure would put us out of business 2 years ago still hasn't even shipped." Boy, and the ones who never forgot what business they were in, like some of Solaris, for example, are arguably now at least a year ahead of where called Windows 2000 would be able to ship today. I guess I want to ask the question just now. If someone came to you who appeared to have that same kind of mindset and said, "I've been using OS2 for a long time, it's a medium I need, but it looks to me as if it's only a question now of what I'll use instead in 2 or 3 years," how would you answer that question? Would you tell them that it's appropriate for a migration strategy, or that if there are needs being met, they should continue to invest in application enhancements and monitoring tools and so on for that OS2 platform? We don't have to go in sequence, and if you feel it's most inclined to suggest how that question can be answered, please step up.
Never be shy. Well, we tell clients, and I get that question all the time, and my answer is, if you're afraid to, one have a migration plan, never hurts to have a plan B, but the reason to do it is because you perceive that there's a problem that you can solve with one that you can't solve with the other. And I have 2 things that I like to tell my clients, and it's amazing how much they think it's new. Keep it simple, stupid, and today growth life picture. We still have clients in the public that are still, for whatever the reason, have APs carried somewhere.
Yeah.
They're and we have one client that has implemented a firewall in DOS, and it's running on an AP, and it runs extraordinarily well, and that's a department firewall, because they couldn't get their own, and whoever had the AP left the company, and for whatever reason, the AP is no longer on the inventory. I mean, you were talking earlier about the guy trying to do asset management. Hey, that's real.
So it's literally a black box, or if you will, beige box, costing essentially nothing to run and it's doing the job.
And I ran into a grandmother comment last year who was in the Linux section of the Sands Expo Center, who wanted to look at Linux because her grandson had told her that that would allow her to keep her computer because she didn't want to invest in upgrading her 386-based computer. So, and the last time I checked, she was actually running Linux with KDE and had learned to do whatever she wanted to do, and anything that required reconfiguration that her grandson does for her. The doctor makes house calls. And I said earlier, I tend to be a platform agnostic. I don't believe that there's any reason to get off of OS2 unless there's something that you can do better, cheaper, faster on another platform. Let me give you an example. And part of what I wanted to do today was video editing. I spent a whole lot of time looking at the alignment because it's really right? That's not getting off of OS2. That solves a video editing problem. And let me go back to something you said earlier. Really a hallmark. And that is, if you talk about applications as services, that's really the issue. When you talk to developers about building your job, you say it's not an object model, it's a service model. What's the service? What's the problem that you're trying to solve? What are you trying to do? If you're doing it on OS2, it's going to be operating. If you're not doing it in OS2,
I'm not sure.
you know, I'll tell you what I told developers at the workshop. You first start to conversion like this, make sure it works in the source environment, because converting it to OS2 isn't going to make it work. If it didn't work, it won't. If it did work, you have a benchmark, and it should. If it works, fine. If it doesn't work, solve the problem. Don't treat the system. The issue isn't with platform using, what's the problem?
Thank you.
I work specifically in the market, specifically in banking in the last 2 years.
Can I just speak louder? Well, I think I want to
Well, yeah, please.
Okay. Close enough, and I don't look hokey off.
You'll always look hokey.
There, you know what kicking boots. You got it.
You've used up your quota there.
Yeah.
Sit back and go, we got an hour and a half.
Yeah, but there's something to talk about.
Well, we're with a lot of the larger banks, and if you, we had to look at that 2 years ago, because I'm making my living on the commission selling those too. And we had a lot of banks saying, where are we supposed to be? Where are we supposed to go? Were we supposed to go to Henry? Were we supposed to go, back then Linux wasn't an issue. But we're not going. And what we did is we went out and called probably the top 10 banks in the world. So we looked at what they were doing. And you know what? We can't do it on NT. They locked down desktops. They had software distribution. They were basically using OS2 not in the back client, but in the very, what I would call, transaction-oriented use bank tellers, platforms within retail banking. We also found out that OS2 is being used in very large accounts that have a large number of distributed nodes. Right? The reason they were using OS2 is because they couldn't get anywhere near the cost of ownership return on NT. They knew if they went out there with a back client without the software distribution tool, without the ability to lock down the desktop, they were going to go out of business. AKA one bank with 70,000 clients. The cost difference. We gave an option that's called Workspace on Demand. And it is a back client, it's a thin client technology that takes their existing PC, 486, right, machine, if they want to do that. And what it basically gave them was another 3 to 5 years of breathing space. And that's really what they needed. They needed to get through the year 2000. And it also gave the latest browser, the latest JVM, because what the banks told us they wanted to do is they wanted to go to a new paradigm. And it was called centralization of service. And a lot of people think, a lot of people think I want to bring a whole bunch of install servers back to the central site, right? Well, that's not what I am. I'm from IBM. Let's do something really cool here. Put it on a 390. Let's put it on one server instead of on 20 install servers. When we started showing Domino being accessed through a browser with email, we started showing JVMs running on the client, providing a pleasing graphical interface to data, right? One of the questions I'd ask them is, why is it that you can support millions of users over the internet for less expense than you can support 10,000 of your internal users? That started the thing. So, OS2 is not dead. It's alive and well over here in Workspace on Demand. It's alive and well on the server. Because as you move things from the client back to the server, these stronger servers can handle the workload. So what we've done, and we've been very successful with this, I think we've talked about it in Germany with the DAD consortium over there, a couple other customers, we're moving to a thin client technology for 2 reasons. One, keep your costs under control. number 2 is that faster application development. And 3, about a third, get the internet connection. Start using that on the internet. Great.
No, maybe just for annotation to these statements, absolutely true. Europe and European market is outstanding going to it. Just a few numbers as an example. Talking about the financing sector in Europe, between banking, insurance companies, all of that, we still have a market share for more than 50% of those two, on the client and on the server. And even though customers thinking about MT on their workstation, ask me how long could they take on the server, because we don't want to move away from our server side. That's what we hear from the customer. They're thinking about their clients. There are some features which are pretty hard to cover. And it basically always comes down to talking about Microsoft Office applications on your clients, and there are different approaches to do that, and which leads to big discussions over the feedback shortly. But nobody wants to move away from that server. So that's pretty much commitment, at least from the European market, to go to server side. Another key thing, a new company came up in Germany called Facebook. And what they do is having a desktop hub for Internet over TV, which is emerging market in Germany right now. And they use extensive testing on their how they come out with a stable, reliable, having all the internet access they need. They test Windows, Linux, NT, that's what they do. Lots of these EA running full force. Cascade full force and their own software distribution mechanism. So might be a something. Anybody interested in will be a coming company for CO2.
Not to put you on the spot, do you happen to know anything at all about the hardware configuration of that box, processor, memory it's requiring to deliver work in that kind of embedded context?
We do have some details over here. We have certain people sitting here.
What's it taking to deliver work with an embedded system? What kind of footprint does it have? Okay, sorry for the easy X, which is what, a 46 class chip? No, any embedded chip. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so for a set-top box is not especially fast. So far from being more about technology, Warp is actually going to be shipping in what is regarded as, by any measure, one of the leading edge pathways for PC technology to move into, which is the integration of video and other forms of data in a consumer level device. Oh, right. So there's a media heritage here too. Right. Outstanding. Bob, do you want to add anything on the first question, or should we go to the mic?
Looking at it really quickly, similar to the Metabox example about 2 years ago, we looked at a business model of outsourcing computer business, the business desktop, service support, hardware, and software as a service, and looked at what you have to do that. And we looked not at Linux so much, but you needed an operating system that was robust, that could run 7x24, that could be managed from a remote location because the consultant needs to dial in and do the maintenance. Anytime the consultant has to visit the site, they eat into their net revenues. Okay, so what you basically need is something where you set it up, it runs, you can manage it from a remote site, and guess what? That's OS2. It's on Windows. There's no other real choice for implementing that. The issues that David and everyone else mentioned are what come into play, which is you have to have the device support, you have to have the application support, you have to have the programming tools to continue to develop. But if those are not issues, then this is the proper platform to run that business model. And that is the whole idea of we asked Peter to build an internet with one thumb. You know, OS2 lets you do that. And it lets you push down a whole desktop. The Vendor 100 is sitting out there on a thin client. Nothing thin about OS2 is a thin client. So that, I think, is leading edge. Now, we continue to look at other platforms like Linux, but there is nothing getting stale about OS2 as a platform. It's the best server with its ability to support the various clients, performance, reliability. You know, it really comes down to exactly what David said. Why do you want to get on? If you've got a good reason, let's help you. Let's help you address that. There's going to be a lot of change coming in the next 18 months or longer. And you certainly don't want to tie yourself into a model now. This is one of the reasons I think people ought to be really scared about Windows 2000. What's your return on investment window if you migrate to Windows 2000? Gartner Group says it's 3 years. You want to tie yourself into something for 3 years. I don't think this is the right time to make that kind of move.
That's a very interesting point. We've got a nice queue growing at the floor mic, so let's go there. If you kind of have to identify yourself, and if your organization is relevant to your question, please mention it if you're comfortable doing that.
Is that my thought?
Doesn't seem to be.
Go ahead.
Okay, fine then. Thank you.
Right, my name is Dan Hale. I was opposed to hobbyist for 10, 12 years around the law that's been around. My current job is going to use nothing to do with us too. Right? My question has to do with whether is a new warp fire, is there any hope?
Yes. Next question.
Okay, well that's interesting because apparently the most recent internal information is different from that. Can you elaborate?
Well, he asked, the question that he asked is there any hope?
Oh.
There is always hope.
And someone said that goals are dreams with deadlines. Can we frame the question in terms of, is it likely that there will be any more plans in the next 18 months? I mean, would that be hope?
No, is there likely to be a new client that will keep up with progress in PC hardware? Well, right now, but I guess I would settle immediately for repackaging so that you didn't have to have fixed tags and update the install diskettes in order to install.
So we're really looking about a new warp client that has a retail presence and that consolidates all the things that have been happening under the radar over the last 2 years.
I'd like to have JFS, all these old things that are there, it's a matter of packaging and testing. Like,
Okay, well, I think that's the meat of the question. All right. Pete, you seem to have an opinion, or were you just talking about hope?
There is hope. A lot of things have gone on, a lot of things have been done under non-disclosure, so it's inappropriate for me to even talk about that kind of a space right now. I would say it's never given up hope. Okay, keep bringing it forward. Customers are bringing the requirement forward. There's a process we have to go through within IBM to get that kind of thing approved. It requires sign-offs from executives and people that talk to customers all the time. So hang in there, folks. But I can't, I'm not at a high enough level to give you that kind of feedback. Okay?
Well, what did I know in here? Because I don't know over here. Anything?
I pretty much talked to Pete.
Okay.
The problem is, I might know the same information that Pete does, but speaking about those things, it's highly political. We have at least answering the question of the cards and support. We do have continuing technical support is made, the amount of money will be the same over the next couple of years to develop device drivers. And that's a confirmed point. So whatever device drivers are requested by industry, because we don't have a retail version, we only have requests by industry, but whatever card is relevant to the industry, there will be a device driver. So that's one of the major points because confirmed by industry.
There's a couple of things that I'm going to help in. One thing, you don't talk to IBM about future products in the fourth quarter. And anything that is said today is not necessarily true in January. And that's the level of fluidity in these discussions. Now, tomorrow morning, Kim Chung, who's my business partner, will be doing a presentation on OS to the super client. And part of that involves the fact that we are an IBM OEM. For software, we contacted IBM after the startup decision was made and said that we're interested in putting forward a proposal. And the fact that we want to put forward a proposal is relatively insignificant. That is to say, it doesn't hurt IBM to say, sure, bring it down. We have some technical issues that we have to resolve with the product, but we are making a proposal to IBM. We will be asking them to license the client for our use. In that discussion, I don't think it is all unreasonable to pass on the fact that we're not the only people making this request. And that Mensis has also contacted IBM and said they would like to order 10,000 copies of the new OSD client. That incidentally was, I think, a magical stroke of understanding IBM in the fourth quarter. If you want to get their attention,
put something on the books.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's very reasonable to say things like never give up hope. Of course, that's a far too much for paying attention. But there are concrete things in play. There's no reason to believe that they will all be left aside because they're good business cases.
What I think we're hearing is that there are people whose checkbooks are open and whose pens are in hand who are willing to pay IBM.
There are people who are resellers in that position. There are people who are customers, large customers in that position.
Why do you not have to speculate as to the existence of a market for this? The existence of that market is known.
It's important because part of what IBM has to do with any of these things is justify the funding for any R&D effort. And the other thing that is always difficult to do is ask an IBM or about unannounced products. You can ask an ex-IBM or a non-IBM. But part of the story that we heard is there was a client, and it turned out in Europe, that it said to IBM, we'll fund it, you build it. Well, that's going to get somebody's attention if they've got pocketbook strain control, because now it's not coming out of my pocket, it's coming out of your pocket. So the answer is never give up hope. The biggest problem is not whether or not IBM will do a client in response to customer demand that we will build. The biggest problem is whether or not IBM will have the ability or want to release that client for that OS2 client for non-specific requesting funding customers. Us.
I'm definitely going to want to come back to that in a little while. Let me service the queue a little further. Sir, go ahead, please.
Yes, my name is Bruce Penny. I used to work for a company that sold 400 to 500 OS2 boxes to the software that we developed. They went to start on NT and I left the company. So that's where I'm from. But my question really has to deal with the issue of standards and how they're formed in the computer industry. The past couple of days, I was on the other side of town at the Linux Showcase, and listening to some of the people who develop Samba, actually one of their head developers, he was saying that you can get all sorts of documents out of Microsoft on how their protocols work for communicating with their clients over the network, but it's not true. The only real standard, as far as these people are concerned in developing Samba, is what
what does Windows 98, what does Windows NT actually respond to and work with. So in some sense, it's really whatever crap Microsoft packages and calls on 95, 98, or NT, whatever version, really is the standard of what an operating system or a piece of software must work towards in order to communicate with basically what the major desktop operating system out there. Given that, you're hearing a lot of stuff about Java becoming this new standard to work with, to develop software for. How can people who want to use Java rely on it being a real, steady, solid standard that they can work with if most of the clients that are going to be using Java, using these projects, are Windows clients? How, I think one of your colleagues, the person who said eventually because of Microsoft is the own Java standard, simply because they own most of the clients out there that use Java. I may not understand the technology and maybe saying that client really controls Java may not be technically correct, but I think I saw with HTML, what Microsoft meant to is that standard. I'm concerned about the same thing with Java. In particular, are we kidding ourselves saying that we have any real control over what goes on in the computer industry when we own a small portion of the desktops out there and the software that they run? We can control it.
Well, that's a very rich question that touches on at least 3 or 4 topics that I'm sure are of central interest to everyone here. Let me see if I can address a few of them. To what extent can we hope that Java will remain an industry standard if the dominant client platform is or continues to be Windows? Most of the action that we see from PC Week's point of view, which is very enterprise-oriented, is not Java on client, but Java on server or Java on middle tier. And in that environment, the dominance of Microsoft is vastly reduced compared to on the desktop. As far as the desktop and the vagaries of the desktop are concerned, the question sounds almost word for word identical, except for one noun, with the question that used to be about DDE. Back when that was the protocol on the desktop, inventors would say, well, Microsoft publishes these standards documents, but if we don't actually sit down and essentially reverse engineer it to work with Word and Excel, we're not going to have something that we can do what we want. And yeah, there's a huge difference there. That's by no means limited to Microsoft's environment, though. The industry in general needs to learn how to write real specifications the way, for example, people who build spark plugs have known for years how to write real specifications. It used to be said that no matter what the ANSI document might say, the only definition of C++ that matters is what the compiler does with the source code, and everything else is just, code. The same, for that matter, is true of Java, where if you write a piece of Java code that behaves a certain way on a certain platform, and you do not test it on any of the platforms, you will never grasp the difference between what was an implementation-defined behavior and what was a specified behavior. And you might get perfectly wonderful behavior of a multi-threaded application on, say, Windows, where you get round-robin scheduling your threads by default, and get totally different response on Solaris, where you actually have to use the available priority mechanisms if you want the most responsive thread to be the one that needs it. Which is many answers to a many-faceted question. I feel as if there was at least one big piece of that question that I didn't answer, but I'm having a hard time remembering what it was. Do you feel anything? Go ahead, Jeff.
I just want to make one quick comment, and I'll give you a pause to think about that.
Sure.
Which is that Milano just released their work.
Sorry, who?
Milano benchmarks.
Oh, right.
And the number one performing Windows JVM was IBM for NT. So what I'm saying is, the fact that you're running on a Microsoft platform does not necessarily mean you're running Java.
Yes, thank you. That was, I meant that.
Yeah.
Right. JVMs are not indissolubly tied to host operating systems. Quite the reverse. There's more opportunity to pick your JVM for any platform now than there ever has been, realistically. Yeah.
I know I think of this as a reverse of what, in the case of OS 2, you try to take Microsoft APIs that put on your operating system. All they had to do is tweak one thing and break it. This is taking an API set and putting it on top of Microsoft. That's a much better strategy to have than the reverse. What IBM has done, because our large accounts have come forward and said, we're going to Java. How are you going to protect us? Okay. How are you going to protect us from Microsoft? How are you going to protect us from the things that people do? We have an IBM JVM today for 95, 98, NT, OS 2, Workspace on Demand, WorkServer 3 Business, AIX, and Linux.
Okay, there. Yeah, OS 400, and keep going.
So, when you, and by the way, we take problem reports, if that thing doesn't work on NT the way it works on OS 2, we take the problem report and read your NT pictures. So, you have to look at it as a reversal.
There's predictability between the multiple platforms. If stuff behaves some way in OS 2 under IBM's JVM, it has the same behavior at AIX. It has the same behavior at Windows. It has the same behavior on the AX400 and on the 390. And Oliver said faster.
So you don't stray from there. I just read an article recently in the latest Windows 2000, some of the testing they had done, the DDNS capability that they have in Windows 2000 doesn't work with any DDNS standard in this system. They kind of have to wonder when Microsoft is going to prove themselves so bad that people are going to say, I'm not rolling this out because it totally conflicts with my complete infrastructure that I have rolled out. We're not going to put up with this now. I mean, sooner or later,
We are really hearing a new spirit of my house, my rules among our enterprise buyers, and I think they have gotten to like that idea.
Most environments are not homogeneous, all right? Unless you're talking about one person using one computer, and even that sometimes isn't a guarantee. But you have to understand how technologies work. There's this push-pull issue, all right? It's up to me as a vendor to push the technology out the door and make it available. But that's only half the future. Because if there isn't user demand pull, the technology isn't going to succeed. Java has both push and pull. Because I can do something with Java that I can't do with any other language. And that is, I can think about delivering a service rather than delivering a software application or component. So that service becomes ubiquitous. Now, let me make that very real. The last couple of years, we've taken client information and reduced that to case studies about Java versus other environments. Typically, what we see is that Java development costs about 1/6 to 1/3 of doing the same thing, the identical same thing, in C++. All right? Now, when I look at anywhere between a 16 to 30%, 33% cost factor, in other words, let's make that real. All right? If it cost me $10 to do it in C++, it costs me anywhere between $1.60 and $3.30 to do it in Java. Push, pull. But I get something else out of that I don't get in the C++ environment, and that's one of the reasons for the reduced cost. Because in my heterogeneous environment, I've got to develop for a target platform, and then turn around and redevelop a portion of it for each of the other platforms for which I have some type of responsibility. I don't do that in Java.
This platform diversity thing can be overemphasized in terms of how significant it is. If we said that, heaven help the world if World War II had been fought 3 years later than it was, because there were aggressor countries in that dispute who had had their rocketry and their nuclear weapons programs ready to deploy 3 years later, who fortunately weren't able to use those technologies in that conflict. The same thing arguably could be said of the Internet. If something like Windows 2000 had existed at the time, that there was extraordinary surge of investment in middle to large servers to meet the needs for centralized capacity created by the Internet, it would have been wonderful timing. As it is, Windows 2000 is very much arriving late for that party. And the investments that have been made, the investments that have been made in Solaris, in OS 400, and OS 390, and other enterprise, proven enterprise class operating systems, probably mean that opportunity is gone, if not merely for 5 or 6 years, possibly gone forever, because the industry simply won't be recognizable 5 or 6 years from now.
I just wanted to, two statements that I made in January. One of them was, and I made it in public, Windows has reached its high water mark. I said that January.
The bids are about to come up and hit them.
Dogs is over here.
It's amazing how far you can go with no wheels, just a hydro engine.
Running on the radar.
That's right. It blows up.
Windows isn't going anywhere. Dogs is still around, but the point of it is, and maybe this isn't much of a remark because how much higher could the water have gone anyway. But Windows have reached its high water mark, and when I was asked why I said that, I said familiarity breeds contempt. If you've got a bunch of NC servers out there, lessons are being learned, and alternatives are being considered. And what the effect of this is on OS 2, I can't predict. But I've never seen the market more ready to consider an alternative to get the job done.
It's always better to compete against the product than against the PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the overhead projector wear always runs there.
Yeah, there's a difference between architecture and architecture. But the key is, if you look at some of this stuff, there's a small company on the West Coast that did some interesting testing with NT as a server platform, as on a web server, FTP server type box. And they made the interesting discovery that it just did not cut the mustard. So Walnut Creek uses FreeBSD. And while they've got a configuration that will support 4 processors, they're currently using it, or at least the last time I checked, they were using it in single processor mode, and they were getting more performance out of this single processor box running FreeBSD than they were out of a cluster of NT quad boxes. And oh, by the way, reliability is better. Now, they don't transfer a whole lot of data a month. The last time I checked, it was in the terabyte range. Something on the order of multiple terabytes per month. And oh, by the way, when was the last time anybody visited ftp.cdrom.com and discovered the site down? But there are documented cases where Microsoft's own website, supposedly running on NC, couldn't meet it. And they're only talking about that type of terabyte load.
I think those we can't downplay the power of the client device standards. One of the examples I go back to is when they shipped NC 4.0, they changed the security SMB standard as the way a client talks to the server. That forced us and Austin to change the whole AIM service running on process and change our client because they just kind of arbitrarily changed the security model as the way a client talks to the server. We had to react to that. So you bring up a good point. And I still remember back when we were competing with Novell, and they had 80% market share, and they'd go out and talk to all the customers and say, what's open systems? And they'd say Novell. Because what's open systems for our customers is, simply administrators, is work with what I have. Right? And that's really, you get right down to it, the customer saying, is your stuff work with what I have? And if Microsoft gets out there, it's 1,000-pound gorilla. It's a client. It's going to take something to stop them. They can change standards and keep going.
It's important, though, to avoid framing the question in a way that's just some things are fixed and are properties of the environment when they're not. I have an old life science library book called The Engineer that's a photo essay in my alma mater of MIT. There's a picture of some of the undergraduates clustered around their PDP-1 or TXO or whatever it was called at the time. And the caption read, "Today the digital computer is rapidly becoming as important to the engineer as the slide rule at every major school of engineering has one." When you have one computer, deciding what operating system to put on it is a literally monumental type of decision. Think about a model, if you will, of legal services before the Xerox copy, when having an army of scribes who could do nothing but copy out the documents, recopy the documents, check them, make sure that the copies were exact and so on, would be an enormous part of your investment and an enormous part of your operating cost. And the opportunity to add value with superior legal services would be almost a garnish on top of that, because let's face it, the shop that could draft the contract faster than the other was going to win. Well, when everyone has photocopiers, you can actually add value with intelligence instead of just with throughput. I suggest that we're moving toward a similar model in IT. We've been so focused for so long on the idea that an enterprise IT capability was mainly a big capital installation with a lot of overhead and a lot of operating costs, and that the opportunity to add value by superior use of that resource was kind of an extra. And at this point, the hardware and software are essentially free. If you draw the curves, you can figure out that if the hardware and software were all given away tomorrow, it would buy you about a year before your IT costs again resume the upward trend, which is driven primarily by cost of labor. And everyone of the PCB types that we talk to tells us that their ability to deploy new IT capabilities, which is to say new lines of business and new ways of dealing with their customers, is limited more by their ability to acquire and retain and motivate people than by their ability to get hardware installed and to get software up and running. And so it's vital not to ask a question that might have made sense 10 or 15 years ago, which is, what should our enterprise operating system be? When, as David has just pointed out, you need a computer to do digital video editing. Fine, you buy one, because what it costs to buy that box compared to the first 3 hours of time you save from your highly compensated video editing specialist is gone. The small talk people use to make the same argument, that $50,000 is the initial price for a Park Place license was small, because as soon as you saved 6 man months on your first project, you had paid for it completely. It was a good argument, but it never flew, because people who signed for a $50,000 software purchase were different from the people who would get direct benefit from that manpower. It's different rights pools. But it's so important to think about what will the environment be that we're working in 3 or 4 years from now, and to frame your choice. Okay, right in.
One quick question. How many people have more than one computer? At home? At home?
They're all still up there. They heard
okay. How many people have a home network?
That's
2 years ago, that was totally unheard of.
And now it's an Intel consumer product, because you use spread spectrum technology, you use the power of lines, you don't need to rip the big board out of the house, and bam, every machine in the house can share access to the internet. What? This is a consumer product, okay? And in the enterprise space, I encourage you to think of it the same way. This is why I think Linux actually makes sense as an enterprise operating system. The hardware and software are essentially free. What you buy is the software equivalent of having legal services. You don't go down to your company, you don't go down to Jacoby and Myers and buy shrink-wrap legal services. And in the same way, I think the notion that companies used to expect to buy a shrink-wrap NOS is going to be regarded with equal puzzlement 10 years from now as a momentary aberration before we figured out that the software was basically free, and what you want to pay for is someone who understands your environment and can make it do competitively advantageous things in your environment, instead of just having the same stuff that all your competitors have. No one can make money in that back office. You can argue that, but I don't accept that Microsoft owns my client. As far as I'm concerned, when I own my machine, Windows is a temporary state that I go through before I load Notes or before I load Browser, which in my case, neither one of those is a Microsoft product. And either of those really defines the space in which I get my work done, the expertise that our IT department brings to our company. They're not Windows experts, they're Notes experts and Internet access experts.
I'll give you another one. At Solutions 99 in Las Vegas, IBM had the MDM Grid. They had people there from Linux, from Red Hat, SUSE, and Caldera. Right? And I happened to be talking to one of the marketing folks from Red Hat, and I asked them if they had any figures about who was registering Red Hat 6. Right? Try to guess how many of those were home users that had sent in a registration card? Yes. Right? And of that more than half, 60% of them had more than one computer at home. Okay? So when Peter's comment about my house, my rules, Microsoft can be the standard, but it is my house, and in the privacy of my own house, I don't care whether my office is using Windows 98 as the standard or Windows NT. I've got Red Hat that I'm playing with because I can go buy it for $39.95 at CompUSA. And, or I can get Caldera, which is an easier install, I think, than Red Hat, or SUSE, which is about somewhere in the middle. But I can get them all for less than $50, which means that it's an impulse buy.
And the market will pay attention to this because ever since Pentium systems started to ship, we've seen a flip of the traditional leadership in technology adoption. It used to be that home buyers bought what companies had been buying a year earlier after it came down in price, and now it's the other way around. Home buyers now lead in the adoption of faster CPUs, bigger hard disks, better graphics, and other multimedia capabilities, and companies start to buy those when they can no longer buy a machine that doesn't have those features because vendors have simply stopped to build boxes that merely meet the corporate need.
What was it, 1995, I think?
The Pentium season? The Pentium holiday retail season?
Wall Street Journal had an article about this. It was about this time, I think 4 years ago, that they said that the average home buyer's system was more powerful than the average office system.
Yeah, that was really, I think that was
95.
Yeah, and now, you know, that's certainly the case. That's why, for example, AMD is doing great with 3D documentation because they got support from the gamers, and that was enough to get support from the hardware OEMs once they saw that there were software titles that were out there. So even though PC Week is very much an enterprise-oriented book, we have to look at what are the leading indicators for what our readers will be able to buy 2 years from now, and those are to be found today in the pages of computer gaming world.
One more question. How many of you put together your own PC from scratch? All right, now, this is, you know, not exactly non-nerd geek audience. I prefer the term enthusiast. But the point is, how many of you did that, pick a term, 5 years ago? Much fewer hands. But again, all right, but how about 1992? Anybody putting together that? Look around the room, you're still really old. Very, very quickly. The point is that there are home buyers that are doing that. You look at this Davis television. In
all the time.
Yeah.
24 hours.
All enthusiasts all the time. But part of what they were doing in either screensavers or one of them is telling people how to go out and buy for $1,500 for less a super duper system. Bill McCrone still believes this Davis. What did he do?
You have to be real careful there.
No, it's horrible. $105,000 you get a system you want, now you can move it for under $1,500.
Yeah, you have to be real careful there. So, I mean, number one, we're talking about the whole country here, the other classified power users you can get. Okay, you go to my house, my wife uses word processing, internet, and she doesn't care at all for any system. She's not building her PC from scratch here. And guess what? No. Guess what? If she needs when she's going to go down and buy a PC, it's going to come with the operating system preloaded. Because my comment would be, as long as Microsoft owns the preload market,
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know how anybody is ever going to break the monopoly that they have. Okay, I've lived the OS2 battle, and I go back and question if we'd known that, would we ever have even built OS2 if we really sized the problem of breaking the freeway?
Yeah.
By comment, the only hope we have here is the pervasive devices come in that basically get rid of the operating system, right? And applications become the decision criteria.
The other thing that we're seeing is that as the PC price point starts to get well below $1,000, down in the $700, even $500 category, what Mr. Rhodes and Tandy used to call the 1,000 decision level. The price of that Windows license, well, I don't supply some more aggressive technology adoption.
Okay, you'll find all of the years.
Take a look at the management of PC Week. It's amazing how much of this, our editorial management is, I'm working for most of my career. The price of that Windows license starts to be a big fraction of the retail price of that machine, and that's starting to pull operating systems like the Beam and Linux into that retail category. And as soon as you start to see that kind of agnosticism in that preload market, I think it's just going to make people understand that PC is not synonymous with Windows machine, while Mac is the other. I think it's going to start to make the notion of dual booting far more palatable to the consumer.
I just wanted to know how much longer before you sign up for an internet service and it includes the hardware and the operating system and everything else packaged together anyway.
Yeah, there are 3 or 4 competing companies right now. Thank you for really fabulous questions. Obviously, opened up a lot. Yeah.
Right.
Now I just want a quick follow-up. I understand that JVM for OS2 2.0 won't be released until after software choice for people to have access to that. I have to pay for that access. Software subscription for somewhere for 2 years, $1,000. That's
Two things you can straight here was, number one, we want to continue to provide answers to those students. I want to do that. IBM wants to do that. I bring in $0 worth of revenue. You know what? I can't give you the Netscape browser. I can't give you JVM. I know. You can blast me in a second. So you can go ahead and say it. We need revenue from you. The price point you guys did is wrong, and you tell me. The price point that we have on here was that if a customer basically bought one server free business with a subscription on it, they were going to get everything they needed. Okay? That was the price point. It's not $2,000 or $3,000. It's the fact that if you are a small business and you have one server free business in there, and you buy a subscription on there, then you'll be able to get all that stuff. If I keep doing it for free, if I keep doing it for free, it's going to dry up a whole lot quicker than if I find a way to continue to get revenue.
IBM stock not being capable of taking advantage of the apparently null gravity environment of Silicon Valley stocks where revenues are not necessary.
And now I'll be quiet now because I just want to be sure you heard it. Right, that's been one of the major issues we're wrestling with that now with the JVM, and just bring that forward to me. If we need to do something on that, I'll take a look at it and get that back.
Tom's been waiting really patiently for this question. I think I need to service the queue a little more expeditiously. Tom, thank you for waiting.
Yes, I'm Tom Nato, infamous WarpStock, self-published author and webmaster of OS2HQ.com. In my current employment, hopefully not too much longer someday I'd like to be an OS2 consultant, but my current employment, the boss has us put in Windows and Windows-related products, including, for example, Outlook 97. And this Outlook 97, even after applying the Microsoft provided warranty gave access at its client spot last month, started saying that it was the year 2099. Now, you run the software test that Microsoft provides and says this product is compliant. Now, I don't believe that this is the only case in the world of somebody running in a small business environment with 5, 10, or 20 PCs, running a Microsoft product that Microsoft claims is compliant and is clearly not ready. To what degree do you believe that Microsoft products in the home, one computer, small business, 5, 10, 20 computers, small business environment will have significant Y2K problems that Microsoft is going to get called on the carpet for sooner or later and will have to pay the piper?
I don't have the answer. I know that IBM has very strict testing standards. I can speak to OS 2. I can tell you that I have seen defects written against things that I thought were totally little files written out, log files, that customers would query with the REST program that you would think, my God, I mean, how secure, right? But we fixed them because customers probably told us. And I always speak to IBM, and I think we're ready. And banking OS 2 runs the retail banking industry. We have to be ready. I'm not going to take a shot at Microsoft.
I'm talking about the basic system.
We appreciate it. Your question was very specific. I appreciate that.
There's a different issue. How many people have registered every single piece of software that you purchased? Look around the room. The vendors, I don't care whether it's Microsoft, IBM, or Stickleduck Software, has absolutely no way of getting in touch with you if you haven't told them that you have the product. And guess what? Microsoft's registration figures are no different than the sampling from this room. And if I were Microsoft, in all fairness, if you're still running the original version of Microsoft Money, which they have announced is not year 2000 compliant, and you have a problem despite everything that they've done to try and tell you that there's a problem, and you ignore it, it's difficult to hold Microsoft's feet to the fire for your own.
And Tom began with the premise that all of the Microsoft disclosed and released fixes had been applied to the product and they continue to accept it.
97 with the latest Windows 97 patch from Microsoft and running the latest Microsoft. Absolutely. But where do you think that largest outcry is going to come from? It's not going to come from the people that have applied the patches. It's going to come from the 92% of people that never even bothered to register the software in the first place, and now they're going to discover that it doesn't work.
Okay, but doesn't that accept a level of, shall we say, aggregateness in initial design and QA of the product?
Sure it does. And it reflects it. I mean, I raised the issue in 1976 when I worked at Unibank. All right? So my question is, from Y2K then? But my question is, given the fact that a significant percentage of Microsoft product users out there, including a significant percentage of small businesses, based on their belief, opinion, Microsoft marketing, whatever you want to call it, believe that they have been buying up-to-date products as late as earlier this year, how many of these people are going to be angry enough that the public perception of Microsoft will finally put in reality the same number of people that have problems with Corel Suite and Star Office and Lotus? I mean, I hate to keep coming back to this, but the reality is that we as users have a certain responsibility. And even if the patches are applied, okay, there's going to be problems because either they weren't applied correctly or they weren't applied pervasively. It'll get fixed. The world isn't going to come to an end. And I honestly believe that whatever outcry occurs as a result of the scenario that you're painting is going to be relatively short.
Paradoxically enough, I believe there will be products that have a smaller absolute number of Y2K anomalies, but because there is not the pervasive user familiarity and number of teenagers down the street who know how to deal with it, it will take longer to resolve those problems. And Microsoft, even though the number of issues will be much greater, will wind up looking better because it was easier to get your Microsoft problems all fixed than to get your smaller number of less widely used product problems fixed. And that, I think, is what people will ultimately remember. The answer to your question is, I do not anticipate that 6 months from now there will be a widespread public perception that Microsoft screwed up. I do not expect it materially to affect the value of their stock or their position in the market.
I'll take it one step further.
However just it might be for that to happen.
All right. I'll take it one step further. Every single time I'm asked about Y2K, my answer is Darwin was right. All right. Most companies that understood they had a legal liability or fiduciary responsibility to fix the Y2K problem have addressed that problem. Those companies that were of the Susie cream cheese variety, Frank Zappa syndrome, it can't happen here, that decided that ostrich is, stick your head in the sand and not worry about it, deserve what they get. My biggest Y2K here is not what you're talking about, but that some wacko somewhere coming home from a party is going to take out a utility pole, going to cause a cascade blackout that's going to be blamed on Y2K. Now, indirectly, they'll be right. Because if the idiot hadn't been out over partying, he never would have hit the pole in the first place. But it won't be because the utility company wasn't ready. The initial scare will be, the
biggest unremediated Y2K problems derive from the fact that it's relatively easy to do pairwise testing of the interfaces between any two pieces of the system, and exponentially more difficult to do end-to-end testing of that same system. As the Department of Justice in Wisconsin, for example, said, think about the process. Policeman pulls you over, phones in the license number. License number goes to the dispatcher. The dispatcher to DMV. From there, perhaps to the Department of Parole to find out if there are outstanding warrants on you or anything. Many systems all have to interact with each other transparently and in real time before that officer knows people get out of the car and approach the vehicle with some expectation whether he's just going to find an over-partying guy or someone who's got 2 outstanding warrants is looking at a 3 strikes conviction and probably aren't.
Hope that it's Microsoft for your scenario. If you're not going to be the one that the troopers stop.
But the testing can be done pairwise, but to do the end-to-end testing in that kind of scenario is almost impossible. That's the kind of problem that we'll discover in real time. But you know what? The number of problems like that remain compared to normal noise in the system from people hitting a utility pole with a truck, lightning strikes and whatnot, are small. And everyone who's got a big infrastructure to protect is typically going to have 3 to 5 times the normal number of contingency personnel on hand. I believe that this is going to be like the 1984 Olympics in LA, where everyone said we'd make our freeways melt down. But that's because people anticipated that and made appropriate provisions for time shifting of jobs and so on, or just left town for 2 weeks. Wound up being 2 of the nicest weeks in the history of the system. And I think it's going to turn out to be a weekend that make us think, gosh, why can't things work this well all the time? I do, however, have a standing wager on the board that there will be at least 2 major civil disturbances in the U.S. over that weekend, not, I believe, because there will be a technology meltdown, but because there are enough nut cases where some opportunity will come up that will be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So in other words, you'll be angry that Microsoft actually, which side are you on?
I'm on the side that says there will be at least 2 major civil disturbances during the weekend.
Should I join you?
I agree with you. You agree with me? Yes. Oh, he wants to face some of my action here. Yeah. And this has nothing to do with the technology. This is everything from religious extremism to long tensions to people firing guns in the streets because it's a big party. And that's why I'm really glad that there are going to be 3 to 5 times the normal number of contingency repair public safety people out there, because I'm sure that there's going to be something for them to do. Because on the technology side, I think it's going to be down to noise level. Mary Craig, 3M said it best. There's bugs in all of our software. The number of bugs that are undiscovered, unremediated Y2K bugs compared to the existing noise level of bugs that we encounter from time to time on a random basis is not large. It's important not to say there's 0 Y2K problem. It's important to say it's faded into the noise.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. It's a provocative question. Gosh, the mic is empty. How are we doing on time? Gordon, go ahead.
I thought my role as part of the staff and ask a question.
Turn your red sugar.
Bring that out.
It seems to me that for the last 10 years, Microsoft has been very aggressively trying to develop an API into the operating system, embed them into the operating system. Yes. Java, on the other hand, to a very large extent, is about removing the API from the operating system, making it part of the language. Similarly, Microsoft products, I think you had shaken.
No, go ahead.
Similarly, Microsoft development products like Visual Basic are absolutely dependent on the IDE that comes with the product. You can't develop Visual Basic.
Strictly speaking, it's not a language. It's a development environment. Yeah, right.
Java, on the other hand, is expressly IDE independent as opposed to design.
I do most of my job development text editor. Yeah.
My question is, first of all, is my premise correct? And secondly, if so, does that have an impact on the development model, on the software development model as it evolves? And does it have an impact on the way people expect to be able to develop?
When John McCarthy was still at Microsoft at an early Visual C++ developers conference, he said from the podium that the function of the Microsoft Foundation classes was to make available to developers new Windows APIs, thereby to accelerate their adoption and application, and thereby to generate user demand for the Windows platform on which to run those applications. This is very different from the goal of object-oriented toolkits such as Borland's, now Enterprise's Object Windows Library, or OWL, which, oh gosh, now I'm drawing a blank. But Larry O'Brien at Miller Freeman ran through an interesting metric analysis to compare successive versions of MFC against successive versions of OWL, and show that, in fact, by any metric you care to measure, MFC was becoming hairier with each successive release, was showing all the measurable indicia that you would expect of something whose main job is to package APIs and get them out there as quickly as possible, as opposed to rationalizing an application model, abstracting that model from the operating system and so on. And so this is not a new tension in the marketplace. Microsoft, to give them their due, has never concealed the, shall we say, complementary relationship between their operating system and their applications. I absolutely agree with you that the biggest drawback, in my opinion, to any enterprise reliance upon Windows is the gray goo interface between the applications and the OS. When Windows 2.0, I think, Word for Windows 2.0 shipped, we called it an operating system upgrade that includes a GUI text editor, because something like a third of the files went into the system directories rather than into the application directories, and in fact became extensions to Windows. I think that was the crossing of a line that Microsoft has never looked back, and the market has not punished them for making what I view as crossing the Rubicon type of decision. I believe that languages are languages, and development environments ought to be orthogonal to language choice. But I think the answer to your question is yes. I think it's happened. No, I don't think Microsoft has any intention of changing that attitude. The whole strategy with DNA 2000 and Complex and so on is to continue that indissoluble integration of applications.
In fact, making it harder to separate.
Make the question of separation irrelevant.
Yeah, exactly. It's much tighter integration.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you want to more than a yes, I think that's happening question or not. I think the other part of your question is, do I think that affects how developers will do their work? Microsoft, would like developers to think that what we really want to do is write the best darn COM control to do something that there is, and let other Office-compatible applications incorporate that as a service, which is not a bad idea in terms of how we ought to be able to buy extendable applications and use them. But the idea is they should be operating system specific. I think most of us do not embrace. And now that I've taken up more than my share of the time to be able to answer that question, did any of the other members of your want to add anything to that?
Yeah, one.
Please.
Part of what stuck me in developing Java, I'd like to get away from this notion that Java is a language. Java includes a language. It is a development environment.
The language and the core APIs and the JVM are three separate things.
But not only that, the issue the thing that Sun has done, that I think is extraordinarily intelligent, is get away from this monolithic API integrated into the environment and take the APIs and turn them into components. So that there's a security API, there's a speech API.
And it is emphatically not part of the language. The language itself doesn't even include character strings.
That's right.
Those are part of an API package.
The key is that Java itself, the core JVM, thank you. The core JVM, one of the things we talked about in the security session this morning, how many of you heard of inner classes that are part of Java? Right? The core JVM, the virtual machine, doesn't understand inner classes. The compiler unfolds the inner class into something that the JVM can understand.
Well, strictly speaking, the JVM doesn't understand classes per se at all.
Exactly. And in fact, the JVM has changed little between 1.0 and Java 2. There's been some minor changes because that's going to happen. But basically, it's the same.
There's a widespread myth that Java was invented to be the language of the internet. And if you go back to people who were present at the creation, they will tell you Java was invented to be a usable language for writing embedded software for things like set-top boxes on steroids, and that the notion of writing some cool class libraries that abstracted the protocols of the internet was merely a proof of concept of the extensibility of that very small and rather elegant core. And the important thing to appreciate about Java is that some either did something really smart or really stupid when they put the same label on three quite different things, the one being a language, the second being a class library, which has grown and includes many very well-done classes to abstract very important things, and the third being the virtual machine. It wasn't the first virtual machine by any means, but unlike the Smalltalk VM, which is aimed at a 4 megabyte platform inlet, the JVM can run in much less. It also had the good fortune to arrive at a time when 4 megabytes in an embedded device was not laughable.
No, go back before that. Ken Bowles at the University of California, San Diego, UCSD, and UCSD Pascal, it ran on the Apple II, all right? And that same thing would run under CPM, ran on the Apple, same code ran any place you could get a UCSD machine.
And a product called Context MBA did what Symphony did better than Symphony ever did it. 4 or 5 years before Symphony came along, so we told the problem that 1, 2, 3 was written in machine code. We could do a row insert about 1/60th of the time that Context MBA going through a virtual machine was able to do. And timing is everything. And Java came at a time when the overheads of a VM were dramatically more acceptable in the marketplace than they were when previous attempts to do essentially the same thing had not been commercially viable.
I remember looking at the first release of Java in May of 1995 as a beta release for developers, and it looked interesting, but I didn't have any sample code to play with, and I hadn't seen anything, and there wasn't a whole lot that was released with it, and I said, oh, I like the object model, it looks like I'll get back to playing it. Paid out May, June, July, paid in October of 1995, I was at Internet World in Boston, and I was on my way back from doing a presentation, and I had a lunch meeting with somebody, and I went, whoa, what's that? Because I saw something that caught my eye in the Sun booth. I spent the rest of the day there. I called the client that night and said, if you can get somebody up here tomorrow and take a look at this, you missed the boat. I'm not going to tell you the job is real, but I am going to say you got to take a look at this. And I spent the day with Gosling and Company and a few others just picking brains. And I went, whoa. Because all of a sudden, what I saw made sense. All right?
Anything else that you want to give? Okay, sir, please go ahead.
I'm interested in the recognition area slide there, and we did this playground. We built before that was playground over the series. And I have a question about Java, because it was running with the concept. What's the method out? And the reason why we put another series is the time of the architecture design for us, so we designed that whole product and portable to create a platform. And although it's working on a series, we use the same architecture last time on Windows, Linux, so it's really fast and better systems for the actual web. And so we can follow that very cheaply, that's how we actually bring stuff up. Now we also have the need to build cost something good in this environment. I need to get used to the way it's controlled and possible. So I evaluated Java, but I wasn't very thrilled.
When was that? Okay, so close to 20.
Actually, I looked at Swing.
Okay.
Looked
That's what I meant. You looked at it in the context of Swing. Okay.
Was it a 1X or 1.2, 1.1 or 1.2 platform?
I think it was a 1.2 platform.
Okay.
But the question I have is that what I discovered was that the GUI was really sluggish and non-conforming. And that if I looked at
JVM, which implementation did you look at?
I was actually running with Metro Treadway file. So I ran it with using the 1.2. I think it was Java 1.1. I'm not even sure it was Java 1.2.
Okay, but who's JVM?
I wasn't on JVM.
That's not the best performer.
I was wondering, I suppose that to me, it's my perspective, I'm a graphics guy, and I know for a fact that it's going to be a highly horsepower-moving environment for my graphics team.
No.
It's like a GUI is not doesn't require opinions and memory. So if you're doing a GUI, if you have a really good and efficient box stuff model and efficient GUI like the Lord, you're not going to really load the system. GUI has to be set up. Microsoft Office doesn't run much faster than it did on the way.
No. Pulling down the menu is pulling down the menu.
Exactly. But what I found with the Java stuff is it's quite sluggish in that area. And so I'm wondering if what people do is, and there's two issues. One is the address the sluggishness of the UI, and the other is the non-performance issues with the UI. And people will be moving in that platform.
One of the most important things to do to avoid any general dissatisfaction with performance in Java space is to make sure you've make sure you use threads appropriately, with the user interface being handled by the thread and is never impeded by any background processing that's going on. And I don't know if that was an element of the way that you were testing or not.
I was actually just running some of that work with the
Oh, now I understand. I was debating how and what I was going to say to answer your question. Have you heard the old story, doctor, every time I raise my arm this high it hurts, and the doctor's answer is, don't raise your arm that high? The Java sample code is good to show capability, but if you're trying to deal with evaluating performance, don't do that, because it's not written to be a good performer. It's written to be a capability demonstration. I can show you code literally right next to with all due respect to the folks at Sun. Some of them don't understand the event model they created, and they don't use it properly. If you use a lightweight client that's dedicated to the UI process, and it's just that part of it, and it's handling the rest of the services off to some other tier to do what has to be done, it's very difficult to tell properly implemented Java with a good JVM from native code.
I have seen applications running side by side with people that which one is the native one, which one is the Java one, and I have not been able to tell the difference.
So that brings up, assuming I just solve performance issues.
Oh, and they were both acceptable, by the way. Important to clarify the ambiguity on that.
Well, that brings up the other issue of non-performance in the UI. Like if I decide to go to like say the Swing UI, I mean, I can use the user interface that people on, for instance, on say the DOS or the Linux platform or the other platform, they don't be complete. And one of the things that came across looking for the attention process graphics was they wanted to see Apple look like they integrated into OS2 as opposed to look like something that was in Java Swing.
That is a problem that's been around at least as long as, for example, Smalltalk. WarpStock tried to solve the problem by letting you emulate any of those UIs, and they never got it quite right.
There were demonstrations of early versions of Swing where you could change the UI on the fly and go from X to X to rows. And Windows, and the Windows stuff looked like Windows, but Microsoft wouldn't let them release it because of the look and feel issue.
But you know what? This is sort of a parallel to the problem that was reported in the Unixators handbook about the broken syntax make utility, where they use tab characters as distinguished from other white space characters as part of the syntax. And the problem was that the obvious problems with this were pointed out to the guy. He said he didn't want to change it because he already had 10 users. What I'm saying is that, yes, there is an existing community of PC users that doesn't like to see something different from what they're familiar with, but there's an awful lot of folks out there who have not yet become habitual users of any system. And it's a good idea to think about how you can sell stuff to them rather than how you can fight for the next upgrade sale to the existing market. That's just a suggestion.
Let me make one other point very quickly.
Yeah,
The whole issue of user interfaces, if you're a software developer, software anything, and you're writing software, if you haven't read Don Norman's book, The Design of Everyday Things, you're making a huge mistake. All right? From my perspective, that book should be required, mandatory reading for anybody that claims to interface anything to an end user.
There's also a different visible computer. We could probably spend another 10, 15 minutes on this, but I have one more person in the queue, and I'd like to get to them before our nominal finishing time in a minute from now. Sir?
One question, one follow-up on that.
Sure.
Nowadays, the standard interface that users are becoming familiar with is not so much just Windows anymore, it's what you see on a web page.
Absolutely. So the browser and the web page define the standard page, so when you
People's acceptance of what they interact with is much more open than it used to be.
Isn't that nice?
A button is a button is a button. If they see it, they'll click it.
Yep. They become accustomed to more variety in implementation of those concepts than they previously were.
Yeah, so the look and feels in Java, while important, are probably not as important as they were.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
The question that I have is, obviously, why all of us are here is because of either, my name is Mark Anderson, I worked for IBM for a number of years, I'm currently working for one of their subsidiaries, Tivoli, now for the last year. But I'm here just as an OS2 hobbyist, one who's done OS2 development before, but is currently doing Java development for various platforms. One reason we're all here attending a hobbyist conference for people that are using OS2 for business is because we're interested in how to use it effectively and what the future holds, which is what we've been talking about here. And I agree with all the statements that were made about, don't use what people tell you need to use what's right for the job. If you're using OS2 now and these banks and other companies is getting their work done, this is not the right time to change with Y2K and all the other things coming. And I totally agree with all of that. And we also agreed that there is great acceptance in the industry now to look at alternatives, more so than there was before, because things are in rapid flux. But I guess my concern is, as people look at other alternatives, the other alternatives they're looking at are newcomers like BOS or Linux, because it's all the rage right now. But OS2 is not really on people's radar screen anymore because there isn't advertising for it anymore. There isn't a retail client version. Yes, it is being marketed as a web server for the Aurora product to the existing customer set. And I would like some feedback from the panel, either the IBM folks or the other folks from your industry perspective. Do people out there view OS2 as a viable alternative only to those who are currently using it? Or is this a viable alternative they're going to look to as they look to other alternatives beyond just the Windows platform?
I was hoping I'd get a chance to use some of this research. I didn't understand. It would give me a perfect opening. In May of '98, we had people at IBM saying things about Warp Server, like, for example, we will continue to position OS2 as an entry-level server for customers who want to simplify the role of network clients in a workplace. And that was from the then director of OS2 Business Line Management from us. Verbatim quote, positioning the product as a low-end server. But in May of '99, a year later, pardon?
The issue is anything that runs on Intel is considered entry level.
Okay, fine. But in May of '99, when they shipped the Warp Server for e-business product, I think the positioning of that product was emphatically not as an entry-level product. I mean, IBM has some pretty serious Infinity boxes that have Intel-type processors in them. But that I would say borrow a lot from IBM's larger systems in terms of the kind of serviceability and reliability issues that are there. And all of a sudden now you're talking about officials at IBM being saying that this will put OS Warp Server on par with offerings on NT and Solaris, which doesn't sound like entry-level to me, but it sounds like it's at least mid-level. Sun, of course, would like to think that Solaris is every bit as enterprise as anything else. And I think that's a very encouraging, trend. I think we see data points. There's a lot of different curves to do that. But I would like to think that says that IBM has figured out that the tremendous growth that's being driven by the web that's bringing computer use into the day-to-day lives of people who previously had a much less frequent direct interaction with the machine is creating an opportunity. And I certainly get a sense that there are wheels turning within the corporate bowels of IBM, saying, now we've got some really good stuff here. And if we put the right dress on, it can go as far as anything that I'm sure you guys have plenty of applicants.
I was going to say that I think that one right on the money that every day I get on the phone and I call consultants and I try to tell them the business model based on all those figures. And I explain to them why it's so. One of the business before is that when we chose OS2, it was not out of some sense of advocacy. It was a business model to drive. And the resistance I get is not to OS2. The resistance I get is to IBM. Because IBM does not send a clear message about what they want to do with OS2. I don't expect the days of Wally Casey to return. Wally Casey was the director of Wally Casey was the director of marketing the days when he had, a shrink wrap OS2 and endcaps and all that sort of stuff. I think that the position of OS2 in the industry is very clear. But what's not clear is whether or not IBM wants to grow the OS2 client and server market. Now, they might say those things about a server, but there's an awful lot of issues to me about getting an OS2 preloaded on a big Netflix server. When I talk to them about getting promotion as an OS2 ISV, I said, well, what if you guys could run ISV? You got to run something like this. They didn't have room, and I'm talking about the Netflix server group, to promote an OS2 ISV. Now, it wasn't that way before, it is that way today. It's hard for me to recruit consultants to work with an OS2 business model when IBM does not send a clear message that that's what they want to happen in the industry.
Let me share with you, okay, let me answer your question. Why is it that they don't do that? Let me share with you the suggestion that I offered at the Southern California WarpStock OS about a month ago. IBM is not an operating systems company. Microsoft is not an operating systems company. Sun is not an operating systems company. They are three information technology companies, and each of them has its idea of how it can define the landscape of information technology in a way that makes its strengths competitive advantages. Microsoft's way of defining the IT landscape is very much centered on the idea that you have Windows on the client, Windows in the middle tier, Windows on the server, because they're very API-centered. The Windows API is their primary asset. IBM has an asset that is in their incredible depth and ability to service the needs of the enterprise customer. They are arguably now primarily a services company, having made a very difficult transition to reach that point. And they don't need to handle their own desktop client OS to create competitive advantage in the market as they would like to define them. And any resources that go into fighting for share with Windows on the desktop are perpendicular to any direction that they want to go in that is going to generate stockholder returns. There is simply no strategic benefit to IBM in displacing Windows on the desktop with Warp on the desktop, because they're not going to make a big difference in the way the world of IT is viewed, in the way that they can, for example, with the Magic Box campaign, which I think is absolutely brilliant, of getting people to think of servers as being like the most important things that determine their satisfaction with electronic catalog shopping, their satisfaction with email, and so on. You're making the awareness of the server a consumer thing in a way that Intel made awareness of microprocessors a consumer thing, and look how well that turned out. And the notion that IBM is in some way, that it's a failure of will, or a sign of some kind of organizational Alzheimer's disease, that they can't get their act together on what to do with Warp as a desktop OS, I suggest is trying to make IBM play the game by Microsoft's rules, when there's no obvious strategic benefit to IBM in doing that, and every strategic reason for them to put their wood behind another arrow. That's why it doesn't bother me anymore that IBM doesn't seem to want to fight that battle. Because I ask myself, what's in it for them? Oh, okay. The question I want to reemphasize is why, when people seem to be so open to alternatives, aren't they as ready to look at OS2 as they seem to be at others? Right.
Yeah.
If you're asking people to make an investment, not always a monetary investment, but an investment in skills, an investment in time, and so on, and those are essentially, they come back to being monetary. And you look to the vendor, and you say, give me some comfort level. And that comfort level has not been forthcoming. And I wrote an article for Pretty Futures Online a little while ago that said, IBM's motto, think, should be, think again. And I think that people in IBM need to take a look at the industry landscape and carve out, not go back, not move backwards, but take a look and exploit what's happening in the industry today. And those people have the resource to develop a cohesive strategy that moves this ball forward, because OS2 isn't going anywhere. That's the message that these people have to understand. The reason they have to come back and make this blind decision over and over again is because they made the wrong one for the industry. And Esther Schindler is fond of saying, if you want to know something's important, throw it away. If you want to know if something is a problem or not, ignore it. If it doesn't go away, it's something to deal with.
Okay, we need to wrap up because Gordon gave me a 10-minute warning about 9 minutes ago, so okay, go ahead.
I'm a
salesman. I
Alright.
I will tell you that in my territory, which is basically a very large account, I know you want me to go after consumer market. I want to come back and say, in our accounts that were our very
it looks like we're still feeding the
banking, financial, insurance companies have been very successful with the strategy we're on. We've seen a new release of Web Server 3 business. The server hasn't yet stronger. We have the AIX file system underneath Web Server. Correct?
The question is the product being brought to new customers or merely to maintenance of existing accounts?
I think right now we're going after our install base, because guess what? That's where my revenue opportunity is right now in the year 2000. I'm not going to sell our whole marketing people told us, we have told us, hey, you know what? We're not going to be buying new stuff in year 2000. People are going to upgrade what they have to year 2000. And our customers said, go after it. What are we going to do next year?
Very good point. I'm going to give dispensation to take one more question.
One sentence real quickly, what I'm waiting for from IBM. You've seen the commercials that say so-and-so is an IBM e-business. I'm waiting for that to be a sticker campaign, branding campaign, like Intel Inside, where IBM equates the security and the reliability of an e-commerce solution to me as a consumer, to elevate that IBM e-business moniker to a valuable brand. And when that happens, then you'll start to see OS2 Warp Server for e-business begin to penetrate new customers. Okay.
Sir?
Here, Ray Thompson, I work for an internet company which I can't quite reveal the name of it due to some things we're going through right now, but one of the problems I run across at work is getting the word out. As a developer,
we definitely come across some applications that we like, some development tools that we trust and believe in, that we want to use, but when we try to get it up to rank, this is what we should be using, we're pretty much beat back down to reality that you guys just, use what we tell you to use. In other words, use Microsoft products. So we use the Microsoft products knowing this is not what we should be doing, but we are obligated to do so because the word comes down from the boss. The boss wants to make the stockholders happy, so, we're going to use Microsoft products because that's what the stockholders are reading in the so-called PC magazines and the PC weeks. They don't know of any other things except Microsoft. And my question to you is, what is being done in these publications to get the word out about alternatives? Because it seems like everybody's being bombarded with all the Microsoft-type applications instead of saying, hey, there's a choice. What exactly sets the priority as to what gets published by some of these publications?
Well, this is our lead editorial from July 19th, which you can't make a much more definitive statement about what PC Week tells people. Enterprise IT buyers should pay little heed to Microsoft's latest 2-year plan for Windows-based operating systems. The company's near-term release of Windows 2000 overshoots the desktop demand. The slimmed-down Neptune variant promised in 2001 is optimized around Microsoft's convenience rather than its customers' needs. I'll skip to the last paragraph. Developers and vendors would be wise to avoid the distraction of Microsoft's distant destination and focus on proven small footprint operating systems that are available now, not in 2 years. IT buyers would do well to ignore hype based on awkward morphing of desktop operating systems and to start opening up their IT architectures and special emphasis on cross-platform security and management. I don't know how many more definitive we can get. And there's a widespread perception that we tell people to use Microsoft. And if you actually go back and look at the articles, you'll find that we give space to non-Microsoft products that is probably 10 to 20 times as great as it would be if our space decisions were determined by market share. I keep telling people, why do you think anyone needs to read PC Week? Why not PC Quarterly? Why not PC Annually? If there aren't choices to be made, no one needs us. And so it's absolutely in our competitive interest to promote the appearance of competitive diversity, even beyond the degree to which it actually exists. There's simply no business model for us to exist in which we tell people, stick with Microsoft, you'll be happy, don't worry. We don't make any money in that space.
There's a perception issue, and a whole lot of companies do it for whatever the reason. They take exactly the same attitude that you're talking about with your boss, and I do not believe that it's because of a press-driven issue, but it's strictly because of a non-technical decision that says it's easier to standardize here by fiat versus competition.
If you take sales calls on the IT staff while your competitor is taking sales calls on corporate management, then technology decisions will not be made the way you might wish that they were made. And there were companies like, who was the name of Power Stock? Yeah, that was I believe the extraordinary success of Power Builder as an enterprise application development to drive primarily the fact that they knew on which door to knock. If you wanted to make the enterprise sale. And this is something IBM, used to have the technology in the world. I think it's one of the things that Microsoft has learned very well from IBM. You want to sell to the enterprise, you sell to the enterprise management.
CEO, not the CTO.
I just couldn't help noticing that the next presentation in this room is by Serenity Systems. 29-second install on OS2 is a marvelous one.
The shortest session.
And on that cheerful and optimistic note about the entrepreneurial opportunities that exist in the OS2 space, I thank you all very much, and I thank our panel for submitting.
That doesn't do anything. It doesn't matter. It's okay if it overdrives.